Hi, I'm cKnoor, and this is my beginner's guide to Blood Bowl, episode 3. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Shouldn't you be professional Blood Bowl players by now? In today's episode, we're going to start out by talking about kicking, how you're supposed to kick, and why the skill kick is awesome. And then, we're going to try and bust that cage open. According to the manual, this is what a kick is. After both teams have set up, the coach of the kicking team places the ball in any square in the opponent's half of the pitch, including the opponent's end zone if he likes. The ball will then scatter in a random direction using the scatter template, roll an 8-sided die once for the direction of the scatter, and then roll a d6 to see how many squares the ball will go. The scatter refers to the scatter template, which is basically a square having marked all the squares around the center square from 1 to 8. So you roll a d8 and then whatever happens, happens. Now, if you don't have the skill kick on your team, this essentially means that there's only one square on the entire pitch where it's actually safe to kick through. Sure, you could place it in a corner and hope to get lucky, but we're trying not to be lucky here. Now, in order to use kick, your player with the skill can't be standing in the wide zone, nor can he be standing on the LOS. That means, in general, there's only going to be about 4 players on your team that has the ability to use kick because, 3 players on the LOS and then 2 in each wide zone. The thing that makes kick so good is that it halves the d6 roll that the ball travels after you roll the scatter. And this means that you can, you're much better at predicting where the ball wants to go. And you can actually utilize this if, for example, your opponent front lines his LOS and there's not many players in the backfield. If you then kick deep, you can be pretty sure he's going to have a hard time defending that ball properly if you're, say, a fast team. Or you could kick it short, that way making sure that your opponent actually has to scramble to protect the ball properly. Unfortunately, not every team can or should get kick because you need that certain type of player that doesn't have any base skills that he desperately needs. That's why it's so good on perhaps that 4th lineman that's not on the LOS. Or actually, that's it. If you got lineman, give it to a lineman. For those teams that can actually get kick on a player that can be used on every kickoff, kick is a very powerful skill. It's not a first pick skill, but if you've got a few level ups on a few other players that have gotten some blocks or perhaps some dodge, definitely pick up kick. It allows you much greater mobility on the pitch. Now, let's get to those cages, shall we? I guess it's time to come clean. When I said cage busting in the intro, I was being I wasn't lying, I just wasn't telling the truth. In episode 2, we covered how to set up a cage. So you should be familiar with the basic cage, which is also the only cage you should be using. Busting up a cage is really hard unless you have the proper skills, which most teams don't. So instead, we're going to focus on how the fuck do I deal with a cage? Now, there are a few different options depending on what type of team you're playing. If you're a Bashy team that can probably outbash whoever you're playing against, then probably knocking out a corner and just mashing as many people as you can in there is going to be the preferred method of dealing with a cage. If you're a bit squishier like an elf team, that's not going to be a good idea, so instead, you're probably going to use the other main strategy of dealing with a cage, which is usually called screening, which means that you try and stop the cage from moving forward, thus making it impossible for your opponent to score before the half is over. Now, a cage is really slow, and that's what screening is taking advantage of. So, first of all, let's have a look at how a screen works. Okay, so the basic of any good screen is that you want it 2 players deep. And by that I mean you want one player in front and another player directly behind that guy. The reason you want it 2 squares deep is so that an opposing coach can't just blitz away one of your guys and then run through. If it's 2 players deep, that's just not possible because, as we all know, you only get 1 blitz per turn. So at best you can knock one guy down and then the cage is stuck again. So let's have a look at how that looks. Now, of course, this is just an exhibition game. I am not using all my human players. I'm just using the 5 for the cage. So when it's a live game, it's going to look totally different. But the general idea stays the same. Okay, so the pesky humans have a 5-man cage. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to try and stop that cage from moving anywhere closer to our end zone. Like I said, you want your pillars or columns or whatever you want to call them, you want them 2 squares deep. Now, an important thing is that you don't want your players in base-to-base contact with the cage. That would just allow the cage to block you, and we don't want that. So, 1 square away, please. Now, if you want a really tight screen, which works out great sometimes, you might want to put your players just 1 square between each other. That's not usually necessary though. You can most certainly get away with 2 squares because the amount of tackles on coverage is going to be the same regardless. In fact, I would advise that you look at my setup here and try and emulate what's being done in the middle. Making a screen to the side is kind of tricky because, well, you got diagonals to work with and you know how they work to dodge through. So what I like to do is, rather than have it 2 space deep, have it 2 space wide and then perhaps put another guy back. So even if they blitz 1 person away, they still can't get through because there are tackle zones around. And of course, they can still sneak through on the side, so that's why I move another guy up there for cover. He might get blitzed down, but I reckon the human team are so far away that it's not going to bother. And 1 last player up here. Sure, he can get blitzed down, but the humans can't really move around much. Let's have a look and see what the humans actually can do. They can decide to just move the cage forward 1 square and be in base-to-base contact with my guys. Well, or they could try and move just to the side and try and get the Wood Elves out of position. Not likely to happen because the Wood Elves are in general faster. But they have to do something. Now, I'm using my spare players here, so it would, of course, look different. But like I said, even if we knock 1 player down or away, not much has changed. Like, the cage can't move forward. Once again, this is a air quotes perfect example of a cage and a screen. This is not what it's going to look like in your game, but the point of a screen is to just slow the opposing coach down enough that he doesn't have time to score. And you do that in general by putting up enough tackle zones and enough cover with your players that his players can't break through. They can try and run around, but running around costs movement, and hopefully you can redirect your players if he decides to shift sides and put up another screen on your next turn, and then you dance back and forth until someone's annoyed enough to do something risky, which should be the opposing coach and not you. Ah, but I can hear you screaming in the background. What if you're a Wood Elf War Dancer with Leap? Then I can bust that cage open just fine. Sure you can. Here's how you do it. First of all, before you actually do the Leap Blitz thing, make sure you have your screen up, so worst case scenario, when you inevitably fail, you still have your screen. Then, you need to get that guy to remove the assists. And then, we get to do the fun stuff. Okay, so let's leap into this cage, shall we? It's not that hard, it's just tricky, and it's a 1-die block. And oh no, you failed your leap. Reroll. Oh crap. Yeah. So that worked out great. I've got like 5 or 6 more of those because I tried to show you how you actually do it. Apparently Nuffle refused to let me, so it's not possible to leap into cages anymore. I'm sorry, everyone. On to actual, advice. Let's talk about the other most prevailing tactic of dealing with a cage, which is kind of the opposite of screening, knocking out a corner and just mashing everyone in there. Now, I'm going to keep using this Wood Elf team here because I'm lazy and I don't want to restart the game, but just imagine there's some type of way bashier team than, well, Wood Elves. What you want to do is you need to find the cage's very own weak spot, and by that I mean see which of the players on the cage is the easiest and safest to blitz down. In this case, it's this lineman dirty player here that I'm gonna move a guy up to give an assist and then blitz to hopefully knock him down. Now he's still gonna be around in the cage because I can't really knock him out. Once that's done, you knocked a corner out. What you need to do, or rather what you want to do, is you want to put as many players as possible in base-to-base contact with the ball carrier. That's usually going to be 2 unless you somehow manage to knock someone out or is amazing at dodging, which as a Bashy team you're not going to be. Once you've done that, you want to try and tie up the rest of the cage so that they can't help out when the opposing coach wants to block the ball carrier free. Because as it stands right now, the human coach has an option of either trying to dodge away, block away, or blitz out. And dodging is risky. Blitzing out, not really possible in this case, as we can see here. It's the thrower that's holding on to the ball, and he can't really blitz anywhere because there are two players in base-to-base contact with him. So even if he blitzes one of them, he's still going to have to dodge out. So what about blocking and then blitzing someone else free? That's certainly possible, but if the human coach does that, then his lovely 5-man cage is kind of out of position, and he still has to deal with all these other guys around. So what you've done is you've transferred the risk from you to him. It's certainly possible for him to get away and reform the cage, and that's likely that that's going to happen, but it's risky. And when you're the one that's trying to score, you want, as we all know, say it with me, minimize risk. This is a strategy for Bashy teams mostly. If you're going up against a stronger team, you probably don't want to do that because you're going to lose the Bash war. Before we leave the knocking off a corner part of our video, I had some questions after the last video about why not put even more players in the cage? Isn't that better? More means better, right? And no, because if you put more than 5 players into that corner cage, this can happen. Like, our human player right now has decided to, I'm going to have a stronger front line, so I'll have 3 players there. No, bad, because that means that I, as a jerk-off Wood Elf, or actually any other team, can do what is called chain pushing. I can blitz a player and knock him back. And if all the spaces he can be knocked back to are occupied, then he gets to occupy an occupied space, and whoever's in that space gets pushed back again. So what happens now is, boom, push that guy. Okay, let's push him. And oh no! The human ball carrier is now in base contact with 3 opposing players. That's not good. Sure, they can probably get out of it with some blocking, but it's risky. If you put more players into the cage, I can just chain push you around so I get even more than 2 on your ball carrier. So, don't have more than 5 players in that cage. If you have extra players, which you probably do, you want to position them around the cage, but not actually in the cage. Minimize the ways I can chain push you, and it will probably be a safer cage. Okay, so do you guys want to know the really secret tip with dealing with a cage? Like the ultimate secret that almost everyone knows about, but no one talks about? It's simple, really. It's called a wizard fireball spell. Now, you can only get a wizard by buying them with inducement money, so you need to be a bit lower team value, but what it effectively does, it ruins someone's drive. A fireball attacks 9 squares. Everyone standing in those 9 squares, that is. Whoever threw the fireball gets to roll a die for each player. If he rolls a 4 or more, that player is knocked down. Since we only need 1 or 2 players to get knocked down, on a 5-man cage, it's really useful. There's another wizard spell, by the way, called Lightning Bolt, which just attacks 1 square, but rather than a 4+, you just don't roll 1. And that happens. So, get a wizard if you can't handle the cage. They cost 150k in inducements, and they're no guarantee that your blister can pick up the ball anyway. But wizards work, kind of. And that's pretty much all I had for you this week. Hopefully we've covered cages enough that I'll never have to talk about them ever again, even though I find that doubtful. Next week, I don't know what we'll cover, but I'm sure it'll be amazing. In the meantime, check out these other fancy episodes, or check out my Blood Bowl stream on Twitch. We stream on Fridays at 9 PM GMT. Be there or don't. You probably have something better I do. I know I don't. Or join the Steam community and play Blood Bowl with other cool people. I've been cKnoor, and this has been my beginner's guide to Blood Bowl. Episode 3. I still love you guys. No creeping.